Distinguished Chairman of the English-Speaking Union, Karachi Chapter, Mr. Aziz Memon, our distinguished Mr. Bayram Avadi, Honorary Consul of Canada in Karachi for many years. Dear friends, chers amis, assalamu alaikum. Allow me to stand on the existing protocol. I would like to begin by thanking the English-Speaking Union for the kind invitation to speak to you today. And thank you for such a warm welcome to sunny Karachi. It's my second visit here, and I can tell you already, I already look forward to every opportunity to come to your lovely city. I'm Canada's High Commissioner to Pakistan. My first role is to engage with the government of Pakistan, but I always like to see myself as High Commissioner to all Pakistanis. Something I learned very early in my diplomatic career is that in order to understand any country, it's so important to reach out and meet as many people as possible, including in the private sector, in civil society, in academia, meeting groups like yourselves, meeting the man and woman on the street, to gain an understanding of the country, of its challenges and its potential, and also to seek ways to strengthen relations between my country, Canada, and the country in which I'm serving. I'm relatively new to Pakistan. Actually, today is my 5-month anniversary. The time has gone by very quickly. And as you may have noticed in the CV that was just read, I've never served in Asia before, or I've never even set foot actually in Asia, including Pakistan, before I arrived here 5 months ago. So I'm very much in learning mode, and it's a great pleasure for me to meet people like yourselves to help me understand Pakistan and the opportunities that it offers. I understand that we're working in time frames. I'm going to try to speak not more than 20 minutes, which is the allotted time. There's always a danger giving the microphone to a diplomat because we sometimes are long-winded, although we're certainly not as bad as politicians in that regard. But I'll try not to speak more than 20 minutes because I really want to leave time to hear your questions or your comments and have an interesting dialogue with you. The topic I selected for this brief presentation is Canada, building a successful, diverse, and inclusive society. I chose this subject because, as any of us sees as we watch the news in recent months and recent years, a challenge that so many countries around the world are grappling with is that of integrating and building cohesion in increasingly multicultural societies. There are large movements of immigrants in many parts of the world, migration issues, and challenges related to building successful and harmonious multicultural societies. I think in this area, Canada has been very successful, and it's for that reason that I selected this subject. We have a very diverse and a very inclusive society, and at the same time, a country that year after year ranks very high on the UN's Human Development Index, indicating a high standard of living across the society. I should say right at the outset, and I say this completely frankly, Canada is not a perfect country by any means, and I'm not here to say that it is. We do have our challenges, but in this exchange, I would like to tell you about some of our experiences because I think it's very interesting to share experiences between countries as we collectively seek to build better societies and a better world together. In terms of the structure of the presentation, I would like to start off by saying a few words about the current reality in Canada, which largely I see as a very positive one in terms of diversity and inclusion. I'll then say a few words about where we've come from, where we were 50 or 100 years ago, and then finally some comments about how we got from where we were, which was not nearly as rosy as we are now, to the current situation. So beginning with the current reality in Canada, I'm going to share some facts and anecdotes with you, and I know some of this will be very familiar to those of you who know Canada, and I know in fact there are a number of Canadian citizens in the audience. You mentioned it to me as I came in. Canada is a country with 2 official languages, English and French, at the federal level. We also have 9 other languages that are official in the northern parts of the country. More than 20% of Canada's population is foreign-born. The last figure I saw was 22%. The percentage is even higher if you go to the large cities. Toronto, which is our biggest city, more than 50% of the population there was born outside of Canada. We're very much a country of immigrants. We continue to accept about 300,000 immigrants per year. That includes refugees and other categories of immigrants. That is almost 1% of our population. Our population is 36 million, so 300,000 is nearly 1%, and that ratio of volume of immigration compared to size of population is one of the highest of any country in the world. If you visit any Canadian city today, you will see mosques, synagogues, Sikh temples, Christian churches of many denominations. Another great benefit of our multiculturalism is you can enjoy cuisine from almost any corner of the world if you visit Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, or the other large cities. Our major cities celebrate our cultural diversity. There's a whole series of festivals celebrating music, dance, and other forms of artistic expression. Immigrants in Canada are very well integrated into our society in most facets, and an example is in our politics. At present, we have several members of Parliament, both in our House of Commons and in our Senate, who were either born in Pakistan or are of Pakistani heritage. Interestingly, our new Minister of Immigration, he was just appointed a couple of weeks ago, was himself a refugee. He was born in Somalia and came to Canada as a young adult, and now he's an elected member of Parliament and also our Minister of Immigration. The highest office in the land in Canada is our Governor General, who is the representative of the Sovereign, of Queen Elizabeth II at present. The current incumbent happens to be Canadian-born and is a distinguished academic, but the 2 Governors General before him were both women who were born outside of Canada, and both of them came to Canada as refugees. The immediate predecessor of the current incumbent was Michaëlle Jean, who was born in Haiti. Her family fled the Duvalier dictatorship, came to Canada as refugees. Before her, it was Adrienne Clarkson, who was born in China, and similarly, as a child, came to Canada as a refugee and rose to the highest office in the land. I mentioned this point, and I know Canada is not unique in this regard, but I'm very proud that Canada is a country where any citizen, whether you have ancestors who were there thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, or whether you became a citizen just last month, you may rise to the highest elected and appointed offices in the land. And it does happen, and it happens frequently. The theme of all Canadians being equal is essential to us and to our identity. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau remarked recently, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. That's a quote. What he was trying to say, of course, is that all of us enjoy exactly the same rights and freedoms, regardless of how long we or our ancestors have been in the country. There are no tiers of citizenship and no second-class citizens. Immigrants are also very prominent in the private sector, in academia, in civil society, and in the bureaucracy. In the bureaucracy, for example, I have quite a number of colleagues who are ambassadors or high commissioners in different parts of the world who themselves were born outside of Canada and are now representing Canada in the diplomatic realm. There's broad popular support and political consensus regarding multiculturalism and regarding the importance of continuing current levels of immigration. We have no political party in Canada that is against immigration. We have no political party that is advocating a reduction in the level of immigrants. Overwhelmingly, Canadians embrace diversity and recognize it as a source of strength and enrichment. And happily, frictions between communities are very exceptional. occasionally you hear reports of isolated incidents, but they are very much the exception and very unusual. Another important element of diversity and inclusion that I want to say a few words about is gender. Canada has made great strides towards gender equality. As an example, and I think of great symbolic importance, our new government, not so new anymore, the government of Justin Trudeau was elected about 15 months ago, has a cabinet which includes 15 women and 15 men. It's the first time in Canada's history. I'm glad to see the ladies are applauding, and I'm glad to see some of the men are applauding as well. It was interesting, after the Prime Minister inaugurated his cabinet, there was a press conference, and one of the journalists said to Prime Minister Trudeau, well, why have you done this? Why have you appointed women to half of the cabinet posts? And his answer was, because it is 2015. That's all he said. It was a clever line, yes. But obviously what he was saying is it's long overdue, and we shouldn't even be asking the question. Women are half the society, and they should be fully involved in governance and political decision-making. At our provincial level, a few years ago, the majority of our premiers, which is like a chief minister in Pakistan, were women. At present, it's only 3 out of 10, but they happen to be 3 of the 4 big provinces. So 2/3 of Canadians are living in provinces with a chief minister who is a woman. Women have also made great strides in academia and in universities. Actually, today, at most Canadian universities, about 60% of the students are women. And in fact, there's a debate emerging about what we have to do to make sure that the men keep going to university. There's a growing presence of women in corporate boardrooms, although in that area, much more progress is needed. There's still quite a small minority. Canada has also made great strides in embracing other groups of citizens who in the past were marginalized, groups such as LGBT people and the disabled, among others. So that's the rosy picture that I can describe at the present. As I said, I want to say a few words about where we were in the past, and I'll keep this short. If we look back 50 or 100 years, it would be a very different situation in terms of diversity and inclusion in Canada. Immigration to Canada until the 1960s was almost entirely from Europe, and as a policy, it was almost entirely from Europe. If you were a black person or an Asian person or a Jewish person, and there were some, although not large numbers, you would have faced discrimination in some instances according to the law, but also in terms of the popular culture. First Nations, and that's what we call our Indigenous people, were marginalized historically, and there were efforts made to assimilate them. Some of those efforts may have been well-intentioned, but sadly it resulted in great destruction and damage to their languages and their cultures. As for women, they didn't have the right to vote until 1918. If you looked back 60 or 70 years ago to see how many women were in a Canadian cabinet, well, the answer would be 0. The first woman to become a cabinet minister was in 1958. But even in the 60s and 70s, a typical Canadian cabinet would be 30 men and 2 or 3 women. As for disabled people, I hear anecdotally from my parents and grandparents that very often it was a source of shame to have a disabled person in the family. Sometimes they were even hidden, as opposed to the reality today where disabled people are employed and increasingly full participants in society. So in sum, Canada of a century ago was a country of very limited diversity and little inclusiveness. Am I all right for time? And now the third part of the presentation, I want to say just a few words about how we got from where we were to where we are today. A number of factors have contributed to this evolution from a non-diverse, non-inclusive society to a successful, diverse, and inclusive one. Our diversity has its roots in our origins of essentially 2 founding peoples and languages. English and French were the 2 or British and French were the two founding peoples and languages of the country back in 1867 when Canada became a country. We never defined ourselves in ethnic terms, unlike quite a few other countries around the world where there's a single language and culture and sometimes even religion that defines a society. Given that we're a vast country with a small population, we have depended throughout our history on immigration for our development. We never would have been able to become what we are today had we not had a steady stream of immigrants coming into the country. So immigration from our earliest days was very much the essence of who we are as a country. Our inclusiveness has its roots in our largely egalitarian origins. Most Canadians in the 1800s, and that's really when there was the first big wave of immigration, but also those who came earlier, in most cases were given or sold at a low price land to clear and farm. They relied on each other for mutual support, and in many parts of the country, a culture of cooperatives developed. As a result of this pattern, Canada never had a landowning class, big landowners, or never landed gentry, and hence we never had a rigid class structure. From our very early days, we developed and emerged very much as a middle-class society where people depended on each other. In that spirit, we developed in our early days as a country a public school system which continues to be well regarded in comparison with in global rankings and standards. I mentioned the public school system because I think it's a very important element in the inclusiveness of our society. I'm proud that in Canada today, and this has been the case throughout our history, more than 90% of Canadian students, children, study in public schools, and most of those who are not in public schools, they're in denominational schools. They're not in elite schools. The reason this is important is it gives all Canadian children, right from the start, an opportunity to have a quality education and to develop their full potential. In my observation in many parts of the world where I've lived, I've seen the unfortunate situation where in so many countries there's this division between those, and it tends to be middle class and elite, who send their children to private schools where they'll get a good education, and then those who don't have access, or the families that are poor, they go to public schools where the quality isn't very good. The consequence of that is you have a whole segment of the population that from a very young age have their prospects very limited. In the same vein, over the years, in our early years after Confederation, there was political pressure from a largely middle-class electorate to develop, on the politicians, to develop other social programs to ensure an inclusive and middle-class society. An example was universal free healthcare coverage, which was introduced in the early 1970s, and other programs such as welfare, unemployment insurance, and old age pension, all programs to ensure that the more vulnerable members of society, those who are unemployed or having health issues and so forth, maintain an acceptable and a reasonable standard of living. I think I'm coming up to my time limit, so I will conclude now. So just in concluding, I would like to say that while every country faces its unique context, I think Canada has proven by our experience that diversity can and should be a source of strength. Canada's stability and prosperity is underpinned by a commitment to inclusiveness that embraces all communities and groups within society. The success of Canada as a country enjoying a high level of prosperity, security, and good governance demonstrates that our model is a viable and, in my opinion, for Canada at least, a desirable one. Thank you very much. Bahut shukriya.